we're going to do for the students, we're going to do this a little bit differently today. Normally, we just ask our guests to kind of lecture, but this week we're going to try doing it a little bit more as a discussion and sort of see where that goes, and it will allow us to maybe look at some of the questions that come up as we go if they're relevant and interesting to what we're saying. So, Brian, the first thing we were going to discuss, as Belinda mentioned, you've had a lot of experience living in different countries, from Singapore, Malaysia, the UK, the United States, so and China now. So, what because it's so topical, and because you have such a good experience in being able to discuss this, I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about what your experience has been, both in terms of sort of your identity, particularly in the United States or in the UK, where you would have, as an Asian, would have been a visible minority, but also your feelings about sort of what's happening currently with the Stop AAPI hate movement and recent attacks on Asians in the United States. Oh, Brian, are you still there?
Sorry, Rudy. You got
oh, okay. Sorry, can you repeat that, Brian?
Yeah, so I missed the part after you said I was a minority in the UK and the US.
Okay. So my essentially where I was hoping we could start was in light of recent attacks on Asian Americans in the United States and the growing attention around the Stop AAPI hate. If you could discuss a little bit about what your experience was as a visible minority, and sort of dealing both with how people perceived you, your own identity, and your thoughts on what's happening now.
Okay. Sure. So hi everyone. I'm Brian, and I'm calling in from Shanghai, China. I'm in the basement of my home because I have 5 kids and they're a little noisy, but somehow the Wi-Fi is not very stable here. So if I get cut off 1 or 2 more times upstairs, there'll be some background noise, but the connection might be a little bit more stable. So a bit about myself, like Rudy mentioned, I lived in different countries. I was born in Singapore, but I spent most of my childhood in Malaysia, and I moved to the UK for high school. And after the UK, I started off on the East Coast in the US at Yale. I finished my undergraduate studies there, and then I moved to Stanford for a master's program, and then I moved to China in 2007, and I've been here since. So yeah, a bit of movement. I thought I might move to like Dubai, somewhere in the UAE after a few years in China, but I guess that's not the case. So previously, obviously, I moved by myself, and now if I move, I have a whole brood to to move with me, and it's a bit troublesome. But anyway, back to Rudy's question about like identity, about moving. I think it's been different in every case. In some cases, it's been a bit more challenging than others. So I think like the first time I moved to the UK, after attending a fairly local school in Malaysia, I think that was like the first like big transition for me. And then from the UK to the US, I think that was a bit better because I already had some experience, having attended school in the UK, and obviously culturally, the UK and US are closer than say UK and Malaysia, at least in terms of the education system I was going through and so on, because I didn't go to an international school prior to attending school in the UK. And even moving back to China, because I didn't grow up in China, right? Like I said, I was born in Singapore and grew up in Malaysia, so that was also a switch for me, because culturally there are a lot of things to deal with, and obviously even like the language itself. Like, believe it or not, I actually learned like most of my Chinese when I was studying in the US, because I needed to like get 2 acceleration credits, and I had no other option other than choosing Chinese, which I had some basic knowledge in. But I needed those 2 credits. So yeah, it was a pretty tough year taking classes, Chinese, advanced Chinese classes, like first thing in the morning from Mondays to Fridays. But yeah, I mean, that was helpful for the later part of my life. And in terms of identity, well, in the UK, personally, I think I had like a tougher time. But like collectively, I think Asians in the US, like the ones that I met, they had a harder time. So I'll start off with my own experience and then maybe talk in slightly broader terms about identity. Um, so when I was in the UK, it was pretty tough. I mean, first of all, like boarding school is pretty tough in general, right? Especially UK boarding schools. Sometimes people make jokes about how like the best the best music, like the best Britpop music, right? Was created because everybody had a tough time in boarding school, right? And so everybody kind of resorts to like music, as an outlet, a channel, for all like the negative energy or whatever. And even now, last week I was with at the head of a school in Shanghai, and he was just talking about how like boarding school, just toughens you up, makes you mature a lot earlier. So in the UK, I think I definitely had a harder time fitting in compared to when I was in college in the US. Although I grew up with like soccer experience, like basic knowledge of like the Premier League, I wasn't ready for like that intensity of discussions about soccer in the UK. And I actually even took a semester off, or at least most of that semester off, to attend an important like exam in Malaysia. And so when I returned, there was also that academic transition where I had to make up for what I missed for a lot of a semester. And then because I had to make up for what I missed, I ended up missing a lot of the like more like social activities or social opportunities. For example, during like break time, the morning break, and even after school and so on. So yeah, there are a lot of challenges, and the thing is, like, although a lot of people in the boarding school, like a lot of them identify as being from the UK, but there was actually some diversity. People from like Nigeria, from Kenya, um, from Russia. A lot of them who kind of made like London their base. Rather, their parents made London their base, and so they grew up or were educated near or in London. Um, yeah, there's some diversity, and I mean, diversity obviously helps you makes you feel a little less special, right? Because or rather you wouldn't be kind of excluded because everyone is different in some sense. But even so, like those people grew up in the UK, right? Whereas I was kind of transplanted, and moved to the UK. So they're still very different. And I think even in terms of like the weekend activities, the drinking culture, a lot of beer, and some school like parties where some students would make out after like the parties or during the parties. Everything just took a lot of like getting used to. And I remember like once I like because like near the school we had a high street, and some people would just go out during the weekends to have like pizza, or instead of having dining hall food. And yeah, I think, under those kind of like circumstances, there's also some differences in terms of how much people wanted to hang out with each other versus like study, so I think there's like different kinds of peer pressure that, yeah, I had to deal with. And then some Sundays, there'll be some of the boys who would go down to London, which was about half an hour away. um so yeah, just a lot of things to kind of grapple with, and trying to figure out where I kind of stood in the midst of it. um to be honest, I actually didn't try so hard, like socially, to fit in. So I think partly, not being, not feeling like it was a very inclusive environment was partly my own fault as well, and
Mhm.
also partly circumstances like having to make up for the semester I missed and so on. But in hindsight, I channeled that into like preparing for the SATs and then preparing for my like US application.
Mhm.
I ended up getting very good grades, because I was pretty focused. And so I wouldn't like sneak out midnight to smoke with some of the boys. Instead, like I slept, like I think I slept like pretty early, maybe like in the past 20 years. Like I had like the most like disciplined schedule when I was in the UK. And obviously that helped me get into like 5 Ivy League schools at the time. And so yeah, like personally I didn't have the best time, but in some strange sense, I'm actually like grateful that I didn't fit in,
Mhm.
or didn't have the best time when I was there, because I think sometimes in life, it's good to be excluded. I mean, but not in like a very like harsh way, like like getting bullied or whatever, but rather just knowing that like sometimes people don't care about you that much, right? It helps you stay grounded, and it helps you just remain humble in some sense, right? To know that not everyone's going to be nice to you all the time, in life. But having said that, since at the very start we're talking about the hate crime in Asia, I mean, like, these are like complete like like different degrees of exclusion, right? One leading to violence, whereas like mine in the UK was just like more like socially, culturally kind of related stuff. I didn't actually personally experience any form of like bullying or yeah, like violence or things of that nature. Um, my time in the US was also um, like was also challenging, but maybe less so. Like I said, because of my UK experience. The thing about the US is this, right? Like you always read about a lot of these hate crimes, but like rich universities like Yale, Stanford, I mean, in general, not a lot happens. Like not a lot of crime happens very near the school, because um, a lot of the schools have like a very huge secure campus police team, right? That's constantly making their rounds around. They have like shuttle buses, for buildings that are located a little further away. Um, I mean, sometimes, occasionally you hear about some incidents happening at some of these top Ivy League schools, but those tend to happen with some graduate student who found some cheaper housing a little bit further away from like the main campus. Sorry, can you hear me, really?
Yeah, yeah. We
Yes.
actually
Um,
we don't have too much more time. I was actually hoping to move
yeah.
forward because you've
Okay,
been
sure.
talking about your experience at Yale, and one of the things that's really interesting about what you've done is you went to Yale, and then my understanding is you kind of moved more into economics and like international relations. Then but then you also did engineering or a master's related to engineering at Stanford. So sort of this combination of doing humanities and STEM. I was hoping you could talk to the students a little bit about sort of what drew you to kind of do both, or in particular, what drew you to do humanities when oftentimes Asian students in particular are pushed into STEM or pushed towards STEM.
Okay. So, an interesting part of my experience is, a lot of Chinese students, Asian students, they tend to apply for a non-STEM major, and then when they get into college, they decide to switch to a STEM major. I actually did the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So when I applied as an electrical engineering major, and I applied in 2001, and so I was accepted in 2002. But because that was the year after 9/11, I couldn't get my visa in time. My visa came in November, and so Yale said, come next fall. So, and during my gap year, I actually had a lot of fun because I was traveling a lot, and doing a lot of fun stuff. So when I went to Yale, my math, was actually pretty bad because I hadn't done calculus and a lot of those things for a long time. And then at Yale, there were a lot of speakers that came to campus, right? A lot of former alumni who Yale alumni who were in interesting fields, like some writers, some some people in the Senate or something, and they would just talk about the experience, and I think that kind of drew me a lot to. I was interested in stories, in narratives, right, and that kind of drew me to a bunch of different courses, right, some which somehow ended up qualifying as a credit for my major in either
Mm-hmm.
economics or studies. So for example, I took a course on the economics of Latin America, and yeah, that I mean, there are just a lot of interesting stories. Or I remember I took this anthropology class on salary men in Japan and office
Mm-hmm.
ladies. Those are terms for two very specific terms for this group of this segment in the workforce, and just learning about their lives, and then watching some videos about how what their work, how they felt about their work, and so on. So there was just a lot of this interesting classes, and the more I took these classes, the more I started moving away from STEM, right? And again, because from the first semester, I felt I was finding an excuse not to take math heavy classes. When I went there, I didn't expect it to be so cold, and so and the engineering buildings were just the furthest away from old campus. So I mean, it's a combination of a lot of these factors. And looking back, I mean, things happen, right? And then my kind of value in life is I think you should just take the good with the bad and just be appreciative of all your past experiences, because they just shape you for better or worse. And yeah, I mean, they make you a unique person, right? So so anyway, I moved away from the STEM stuff, but I mean, even though I was taking a lot of the non-STEM classes, I realized that this whole spiel about interdisciplinary knowledge, education, I think there's a lot of truth in it, right? They're just really random ways to kind of connect, knowledge. You see some elements of philosophy in political science, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
How to organize society, right? We ended up reading a lot of stuff about the French Revolution, and then there's also philosophy and math. Although I didn't take tough enough math courses. I mean, I did take some math courses in the end, right? Because I was an econ major. But the philosophy and math part, that was over drinks with friends during weekends, right? With like the really smart, like, math or applied math major, right? Talking about, this um this like really advanced points. And I mean, I did take like I mean, to graduate, you still had to take science classes, right? You didn't completely just not take any. Um, yeah, and then like I took this class on technology, relating to the sciences, and there's some design. We had to like design some kind of device. And then in that process, some elements of art as well, right? Although we're doing a technology project, so yeah, I mean, I just like the thing about me is I have a lot of interests, right? Some people follow
Mhm.
my WeChat, like I did a series of like a different like pop song on piano like last month, and then I play like a bunch of like random instruments, right? And so I mean I'm just a very curious person, like first
Mhm.
off, and so yeah, one thing led to another, and then I realized like, okay, I was interested in exploring like these subjects in more depth, and some turn out not to be STEM related ones, right?
Mhm.
And even just international studies, right? So I I've been a bit more active with like Yale's Jackson School of Public Affairs, Global Affairs. It's a new school that's going to be, well, it used to be an institute. It's going to be a full-fledged school starting next year. And I'm pretty active, just speaking to like the dean and the leadership of that school now. And like that school was there as an institute of sorts when I was a student there. And yeah, even now having those discussions and seeing like how everything is somehow connected, right? A lot of the discussions, for example, now the political discussions, right? Where discussions about like like superpower kind of like nation states, right? And competition, and uh, trade barriers and so on. Like also eventually end up being somehow connected with like that whole like STEM advancement, right? And whether it's a zero sum game, and and so on, right? And obviously like zero sum game is also a term from like political science, right?
Mhm.
Um, like yeah, and also over the course of this past few years, just working with students who are interested in political science. I mean, some people end up doing political science, the intersection of that with philosophy. Some end up doing the intersection of that with like economics, right? Like through U.S. China tension kind of issues. Some people end up doing political science with sociology or history, right? And just seeing the different U.S. Administrations and their priorities, right? I took a course on that at Yale. And so yeah, just I think just keeping an open mind was very helpful, and just like being very curious about stuff. It just yeah, it just made my like college education a lot more fun. And then when I went to Stanford, I thought like before I leave like the US, maybe I should also like explore like engineering, right? And where better to do that than at Stanford. So yeah, I did some operations research classes, because my major used to be called operations research, right? It was in the engineering department. I took classes on like optimization, um, and yeah, decision making analysis, the more like math science heavy courses. I didn't take a gap year this time between Yale and Stanford, so this time I actually came with some knowledge of math, like yeah, instead of like a
Excellent.
lapse.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it's great.
I just a very long-winded way. I'm not even sure that answer, but I just yeah wanted to kind of share some of the
No, it was great.
stories.
It actually reminded me of 20 years ago. I had to choose a major. I didn't have to choose a major in my first year. I had to choose one in my second year. And I had gotten an A plus in economics. So I thought maybe I should major in economics. I went to one of the economics professors. I said, I'm thinking about majoring in economics. What do you think? And he said, well, once you get into third or fourth year, you're basically only doing math and it doesn't seem very related to anything economic anymore. So I went, okay, I'm going to go become a history major. So I also tried to avoid the math classes. Okay, we have a few minutes left. If people have questions, they please enter them. But I thought I would bring up a couple quotes from an article you were featured in about college consulting and different types of majors that students take, particularly Chinese students going to the United States, and just sort of get your take on which one you sort of agree with or not. So the first one was, it referred to a popular saying that majoring in humanities makes graduation a synonym for unemployment, which I found kind of funny, and I hope that is a little on the wane. The other was, our grandparents are engineers and our parents are doctors so that we can be artists. And so they both sort of get into the idea of making decisions about what one might major in. And as you know a bit about this class, we really try to teach students a lot about the world, about critical thinking, and learning how to think and read and develop their own ideas and have a good foundation of understanding. So I think those two quotes kind of tie in with your business and with what we're trying to do in the class. So maybe we've got about 4 minutes left, so maybe we can end on that.
Sure. So, well, I think there are two kinds of jobs, right? The first are jobs where you have to have, like, you have to come into the job with very specific, like, field, like, related knowledge, right? For example, if you apply to be a doctor at like some hospital, right? Like, it's not so much like on the job learning, right?
Yeah.
You need to know your stuff, right? If you join an accounting firm, you need to know your stuff, right? So A, I guess you have those kinds of jobs. And then B, you have some other jobs where you can kind of like, you pick up a lot of like what you need to know, like while you're on the job, right? So for example, being a management consultant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or even a banker, right? Or if you want to start your own like e-commerce like shop, right? I mean, those things, it's not really necessary to come into it with like, being a PhD major in like e-commerce, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just start your e-commerce shop, and then you realize, wow, I have a lot of traffic, right? Or you don't have a lot of traffic, and then you figure out how you're going to get the traffic, right? I mean, a lot of things based on like first principles, right? And then you realize, okay, I'm kind of short of two people, so you get two people to help you, and then you realize, okay, like the clients are complaining about how like the packages are not arriving on time, and so you kind of look into it, and then if you're big enough, you decide whether you want to build up your own like logistical. Like 2 weeks ago, I was with a friend who runs a site called Dewu, which is one of the biggest e-commerce sites in China now, and a lot of people, a lot of like youth, they buy their clothes and shoes on this site. But yeah, I mean, like, and he was talking to me about some of the current expansion challenges and so on, and I just realized, wow, yeah, you kind of figure things out along the way, right? And you're flexible, right? And it's a changing world and so on. So I think that in terms of majors, like a lot of parents sometimes have concerns about how like you might not be able to find a job or whatever. I mean, first of all, I think it's hard to find a job, like in general, regardless of what major you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't really have like the best economy, and when everyone is kind of like like shut at home and so on. But if you do find a job, I mean, I think in terms of those two kinds of jobs, they have their own challenges, right? And just kind of looking around me, thinking about like my peers. Well, this year it's my 15th year reunion because I graduated in '06, right? And they made me like the chair of the reunion committee. So I speak a lot with like the Yale alumni office and the development office, and I even have a lot of I have very comprehensive like notes on like all my classmates, right, and what they're doing, and what their past contributions to Yale, and there's a correlation between that and their income levels and so on. And yeah, I don't see a very strong correlation between like choosing like economics as a major, right,
Mm-hmm.
and getting into like a better school or something. Sorry, or getting like a really high paying job,
Mm-hmm.
right? there have been instances of some students who, have taken um, like some more like quirky majors and then, gone on to do like really well,
Mhm.
in a field, whether it's as a founder, co-founder, or just, as a slightly later stage kind of employee. Um, and and so yeah, I think that concern that a lot of parents have sometimes is maybe more about like um, risk mitigation as opposed to um, really like not being able to find a job or whatever. Like, I mean, if you are trying to adjust everything like for risk, then obviously, sticking to one of the safer, more traditional professions, it guarantees a high income without a lot of risk, right?
Mhm.
Otherwise, I mean, like I have some friends who major in art history, and I mean, yeah, I mean, they have a job that they enjoy now, because there's a huge kind of booming art scene in Shanghai. I think there's just a lot of options in life. I think
Mhm.
what's more using like a major that um, guarantees employment is whether you can really stay focused on something after you graduate, especially those like graduates of like top Ivy League schools. um because a lot of my Ivy League friends, they switch, their interest every 2 years or maybe even less. They do management consulting for a while and they realize, oh, like, oh, my friends in like the, like doing tech, right? So they switch to tech and they think it's like a lot more sexy than, like consulting. And then in tech they realize, wow, it's so cutthroat, right? And tech, there are obviously different waves, right? There's like the fintech stuff, the e-commerce stuff. There's the social media stuff, right? And so just a lot of switching back and forth. I don't think it's like super helpful, but a lot of students from top schools tend to do that. So I think, like I said, what's more important than a major is like actually being focused, kind of sticking to something. That there's that premium, I think, that you get from sticking to something long enough, where you develop some expertise in the area, something you develop even if it's on the job, and then two, um, you kind of build a network of people in that ecosystem, right? And then things start to click like a few years after you first enter that field. So I think those maybe matter a lot more, and then just being smart, right? Having
Yeah.
like EQ, IQ level,
Mhm.
get people, not offending people, and just making friends who can give you advice and help you and so on. I think those things matter a lot more, like career wise,
Yeah, I
at
think
least.
we oh, I was going to say, I agree very much. I think we need to wrap up because we're a little over 9, but I thought we got one really good question that I think students would be interested in. So maybe if you could try to give a 1-minute answer. Someone wrote in, is there a way to balance what you like and what your parents would like you to become?
Um, well, I think that parents, like, they can sometimes be a little persistent, right, with what they want you to become, because there are certain things in their lives where they, for various reasons, they didn't accomplish, right? Whether it's learning a musical instrument, right? um, because they gave up that instrument and then kind of regretted it, or their parents can afford their music classes, and so on and so forth, or maybe career wise, right? Like maybe they didn't end up being a full-fledged doctor, but they kind of became like an assistant in the hospital or clinic because they weren't able to kind of um, pursue their education to that level. So I mean, different reasons, right? Parents have a lot of like emotional baggage, right? More so than teenagers, I think. And, and so they kind of impose a lot of what they want on you, right? At some point they give up because A, they kind of get older, right? And then B, to just deal with reality, right? Like, for example, if you okay, maybe I shouldn't use a pet example, right? If you keep trying to teach a dog to like do a trick, and then you know and you realize that the bulldog is just going to sit there and like stare at you. At some point you're like, okay, I'll just leave the bulldog alone. Sorry, that's not the best analogy, but I guess my point is, like, people change, right? The goal is, how do you a like do something that you like and stick to it, like, because sometimes parents have valid reasons for not wanting you to do certain things because you are kind of wishy-washy, and you're not even that serious about pursuing something, and you're just like wasting some time, and or yeah, you're just like doing some stuff like playing computer games where like generally it's not really much that you can gain from that, and that comes at the expense of your studies. But I mean, if you have like something you're interested in, but it's not something your parents like agree with at the moment, I think you should just like slowly convince them, right? Like, arguments, I don't think are helpful, right? What's more helpful is just being persuasive, right? And showing them that you care about what you care about, and also just slowly kind of brainwashing them a little bit, right?
Sounds
I mean,
great.
are motivated by different things, right? Some people they are motivated by your potential income levels after you graduate, right? And I mean, there are always examples, like in whatever field you're interested in, whether that's like um like your interest in like insects, like in bird watching, in in I don't know, whatever. Maybe even in computer games, it just takes time to convince them, or to have them eventually kind of give up in getting you to pursue like something that they are interested in, but you are not interested in, you know. And the thing is, like, to do that in the most the least like conflict like based way, right? To be nice about it, right? I mean, to have some empathy, right? Because like, to kind of put yourselves in their shoes, right? I mean, some parents obviously work very hard, right? I mean, for example, they put in like extra hours so that they can afford to maybe send you to like a school with very high paying tuition, or to pay for your music classes, or to pay for like a trip to, like, I don't know, like Hawaii, which they kind of want to go